the real thing is that it comes down to Alexander Mattison. He's the heir apparent. He signed a 2-year contract extension, but it wasn't that big of a contract, to be honest. It's one of those weird contracts that's kind of a tweener. Like he's paid a little bit more than your average backup, but he's not paid in the ballpark of a lot of starters. So they could be happy with him, or they might be using him as a transitional guy, like you were saying a couple podcasts ago. What did you call it? A bridge running back.
Yeah,
So
possible because I mean, let's talk about Madison.
yes,
I think he's been pretty good, not great, given the chance to run. He's had a lot of very, very nice fantasy games and a couple face plants. I don't know that he's a top five NFL running back or a top 10, but he looks like he's somebody that with a good team around him, you could start and not hate life.
yeah. So I remember when I had him in our keeper league, and I held on to him, and Cook got injured for his like 2 games a year. And Madison actively lost me the games I started him in. He was so bad, and I was just like, "Oh my god! If I just played my normal starters, I would have won those games." I actually think it cost me a playoff that year. I think my team was like 7-7 or something like that. It was infuriating when I look back on it. It's funny because I think you had him because you were handcuffing him with Dalvin Cook for a lot for most of the time, and I think you've had much better experiences than I did. Like he was usually pretty good. Like he might not have been Dalvin Cook, but he was good enough with his volume that he was still like a top 12 player when he would start,
A
right?
couple of those games, he was pretty close.
And I just remember my experience with him. I think I had him later in his career than you. I wasn't very impressed. He seemed like an okay guy. And he to me is another case that I kind of want to see Cook move on just to test the breather theory. How much was Madison's effectiveness when he'd come in for 2 games a year for Cook and people go, oh, Dalvin Cook is out. Let's worry about Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen more than we normally would. We don't have to play it. And I haven't looked into the stats about men in the box. And even if you stack the box, that doesn't mean they're playing run. They might just stack the box and bail out or something too. So it's tricky. We'd have to crunch that, but I'd be curious to see how he holds up for an entire year because it's an interesting case where I think if Cook moved on from a fantasy perspective, Madison will go from like a fifth, sixth round pick, which by the way, in underdog drafts, he is literally going back to back with Dalvin Cook right now. I was on the clock doing a draft last night. They were both on the board, and I was like, I'll just take a receiver right now, and hopefully someone else will make this decision. I can get the remaining guy in my next round, because there's some weird risk to it. But at the same time, they could both be league winners if they split, and Cook goes and takes over Miami or Buffalo, and Madison becomes 95% of what Cook usually is. But at the same time, I also think Madison's backups are really good. Now, they don't have a lot of draft capital tied to them, so they have to earn their keep. They're not going to get dibs. So Madison will get the first shot at it. But I wouldn't be surprised if by week 7, Chandler or McBride is forced their way into a 40-30-30 split, or one of those guys is getting 60% to 40 or something like that of the carries. But I don't know if you
Could
have any
be.
strong feelings towards Madison, but that's kind of my take. Is I could see that backfield flipping because and it's not even a knock on Madison. I just think that they've done a good job drafting good players on the value in the last couple of drafts, and that's a reason you can move on for Dalvin Cook and save money.
Maybe. I think Madison is better than just a guy, but I also think he's not Dalvin Cook. At least not Dalvin Cook when Dalvin Cook was in his prime. Have we started to see the fall off for Dalvin Cook? Really? I don't know. I mean, he was pretty good last year still, although he didn't have the volume that he normally does, but I also think the head coach got away from the running game much more readily than the previous regime did, and that makes a big
And
difference.
and that was why a lot of people were excited for Justin Jefferson. Everyone's like, "Oh, he's coming from LA to turn him into the new Cooper Cup and feature a passing role." But I did see some advanced stats on, I believe it was Pro Football Focus, that, well, Cook's last year, he kind of fell off efficiency wise, but it wasn't a big deal. But when you factor in his age, people worry about it. Apparently, Madison, the last couple of years, like 2 or 3 years, he's been trending down from an efficiency standpoint because he's quietly not that young. I mean, they signed him to an extension, so he's not even a first contract running back either, which is kind of interesting to think about because you think of Madison as the young guy taking over for Cook when he might only be a year or two younger than him. And he might, be falling off a cliff for all we know athletically. And he might not have had the same starting point.
Or maybe they just got tape on him now. I mean, he's been in the league. He's been featured enough games now that defensive coordinators might be starting to hone in on him. And is he improving enough to counter that?
Well, now that I think about it, I don't really recall Madison adding a lot in the pass catching where Cook, he's had some explosive catches and runs in his pass. So when he's on the field, teams still have to honor the run more. So maybe they don't do it with Madison. But here's the other thing. Maybe the offensive line's just been not as good the last couple of years, which is something we've ranted about in the past, and that's why both of their efficiencies would go down because they don't have good offensive line. It's kind of hard to run the ball when, unless you're Barry Sanders, when there's three guys at your feet.
This is Joe Smith from the Midwest Football Podcast. Please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It all helps us grow our show. Look for our full show, too, anywhere you find podcasts. Links below.